Patchwork is a form of needlework that goes back hundreds of years. In it, leftover pieces of rags and fabric are sewn together to create clothing and quilts. Today, turned into a hobby, you can find completely specialized shops with tons and tons of fabric, string, and yarn amongst to choose from. It is there that workshops take place, thanks to which this beautiful art is maintained throughout time. Patchwork is indeed a task that requires patience and hard work, since an art piece can take several hundred hours. So imagine you just had your firstborn grandson and want to embroider a beautiful quilt for your precious munchkin. Unfortunately, your son's mother-in-law wants to beat you to it. You both have 53 hours to spend in the best way possible, working day after day. You'll buy new patches and sew them onto your quilt board. They come in different prices, sizes, and shapes. And because of this, sewing them can take from a short while to a whole day. Get your glasses, thimble up, and thread that needle. This just got serious.
Hi, welcome on board. Today I'm going to show you Patchwork, a fantastic abstract two-player game where you're going to make a quilt, a patchwork quilt, using these Tetris-shaped patches. Although it isn't a complicated game, we've made two tutorials for you. A detailed one, this one for the owner of the game or for whoever explains it. Here we'll show you how to set it up, explain all the rules, and focus on the frequently asked questions. Our other tutorial, the express one, is shorter and straight to the point for you to play to friends trying the game for the first time. This way they'll learn how to play while you set everything up. It'll prevent them from overloading on excess information of details that you can explain when necessary. The thematic intro is exactly the same, so you can skip it by clicking on the time labels in the video description. In the video description, you'll find the links to the tutorials, the review, gameplays, hacks, and subscription. Which, by the way, if you've already subscribed, don't forget to click the bell. That way you won't miss any of our future videos. Let's see how it's played.
Remove the 7x7 special tile from the rest. We'll explain what it's for in a bit. Now grab all 33 patches, the ones that look like Tetris blocks. Mix them well and place them side by side, creating an oval around the central time board. Make sure the patches are well spaced apart. The central time board has two sides. Use whichever one you like. They look different, but when it comes to the game, they're exactly the same. I recommend you use the dull side in your first game. The excess of colors and patterns will most likely distract you. Now find the 2x1 rectangular piece. This one. Place the wooden pawn, this one, between the 2x1 patch and the one immediately after it in clockwise sense. Now pile up the buttons and place the small brown leather patches in the spaces shown on the time board. After this, give 5 starting buttons to each player. Lastly, assign a color to each player, yellow or green. Give them their corresponding quilt board and place the time tokens on the first space on the time board. The game objective is to finish the game with more buttons than your opponent. Buttons that you'll earn and spend throughout the game. But be careful, because at the end of the game, you'll lose 2 buttons for each empty space left on your quilt board. For this reason, although your objective is to get buttons, try to fill the quilt up as much as possible. During your turn, you can do one of these 2 actions, buying and stitching a patch, or resting. The player that last used the needle goes first. In this case, it's green, who decides to buy a patch. You can buy one and only one of the 3 patches placed after the wooden pawn in a clockwise sense. Each patch has a label on it with 2 symbols. This one is its price in buttons, and this one is how long it takes to stitch it to the quilt board. As you can see, each patch has a different price and requires a different amount of time. There are some very expensive patches that cost up to 10 buttons, other cheaper ones, and there's even one that doesn't have a price because it's free. In the following order, you must choose and grab a patch, move the wooden pawn to the spot where the patch was, pay for the patch, place, stitch the patch, move the time token. Here the green player has decided to take the first patch, which costs 3 buttons and requires 2 hours of work. So he takes the patch, places the pawn in its place, and pays for its price. You can place the pawn anywhere on the quilt board. Once the patch is placed, it is considered to be sewn to it and you won't be able to move it. So choose wisely where you place it. Lastly, look at the amount of hours that working on the patch requires, and move your time token forward that number of spaces. In this case, it took 2 hours. Let's see what the yellow player does. He can choose amongst these 3 patches and buys the first one. He moves and places the pawn, pays up, and places it right here. The patch requires 2 hours of work, so he moves the token 2 spaces forward. If this happens, where you finish your turn on the same space as your opponent, place your token on top of theirs. And now the following happens. In Patchwork, the turns are not alternated. The player whose token is farther behind takes a turn, whether the token is here, here, or any previous space, including if it's on top of the other one. For this reason, it's very possible for a player to play several turns in a row buying and placing patches. So the yellow player goes again and chooses a patch amongst these 3 available, places the pawn, pays for it, and places the patch on the quilt board. You can only buy 1 patch per turn, but as we just explained, you might get to play several turns in a row. You can rotate or flip the patch any way you want, but it has to be fully placed within the board boundaries and cannot overlap with any other stitched patches. The other action you can take is resting, whether it's because you can't afford any of the patches or because it's simply in your best of interest. This is because every time you rest, you gain buttons. In this scenario, the green player decides to rest instead of buying a patch. What we do is advance a time token to the space right after the time token of our opponent. Not a space less, not a space more. The one right after. It does not matter how far away it is. You earn a button for each space advanced. You could say that you spend the time resting looking for misplaced buttons on the sofa or around the house. The resting action needs to be done completely. You cannot stop halfway. Once you have rested, your turn will be over and it will be your opponent's turn, since their time token will now be behind yours. For this same reason, you will never rest and then immediately after buy a patch. If you've paid close attention, on the central time board there are 9 blue buttons. The first one is 4 spaces away from the starting space, and the rest are all spaced 6 apart. The buttons are not spaces, they are checkpoints. That is why you must not count them as part of your movement or end on top of them. Let's see what happens when a player passes a button checkpoint. It does not matter if the time token lands on the space after or any other space after it. In this case, the yellow player decides to rest. He moves his time token 2 spaces forward and collects 2 buttons. Since he has crossed the first button checkpoint, we must also do the following count. In case you haven't noticed, the patches, apart from the labels with the price and time, they also have buttons sewn to them. There are patches with 3, 2, 1, and no buttons. These buttons make your quilt more valuable. Every time the time token passes the button checkpoint, you will collect as many buttons as there are sewn to your quilt board. In this case, the yellow player has none sewn, so in this case, the checkpoint hasn't favored him. Let's look at the green player. He buys this patch, moves the pawn, pays for it, places it on the board, and moves a time token. Now we count. Remember that the piece we have just placed is also included, so thanks to the checkpoint, he earns 2 buttons. Every time you pass a button checkpoint, the process is repeated. For this reason, it's very important to invest in patches with buttons from the very beginning of the game. Along the central board, we will also find the 5 1x1 brown patches. These are leather patches, and just like the buttons on the board, they are also checkpoints. In this case, the first player to pass by a leather patch gets to keep it, and must place it immediately on their quilt board. The leather patches are great to fit small spaces left behind on the quilt board. The first player to fill a 7x7 square on their quilt board earns the 7x7 tile. This square cannot have any spaces in it. As a reference, the quilt board is a 9x9 square. The 7x7 tile will add 7 extra points at the end of the game. It cannot be used to buy patches. It is possible that in the last turns of the game, the leftover patches may not fit in the space left on your quilt board. If this happens, you won't be able to buy any and will be forced to rest until the situation changes. The game ends when both time tokens reach the last space. The last patch may require more time than there is available, but on this one situation you may place it anyway, regardless of how long it takes. If you decide to rest and advance your token in your last turn, place the token in the last space and count the spaces moved as you would have normally done. Once both tokens reach the last space, the scoring takes place. Add all your buttons, then subtract 2 for every space left empty on your quilt board. The player with the 7x7 tile adds 7 extra points. It is possible to score in the negatives if there are many empty spaces on the quilt. The player with the high score wins the game. In case of a tie, the player that first reached the last space wins.
And that was our detailed tutorial of Patchwork. As we said earlier, if you want to know more about the game itself, here are our review and express tutorial for whenever you need to teach someone how to play. Remember that you can skip the intro by clicking on the time labels. And if you can't see any of the boxes on the screen, in the video description you'll find the links to these videos and any other ones that we publish in the near future. Videos of gameplays, hacks, ambient music. We hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, give us a thumbs up and help us out by sharing it with your friends. If it helped you learn how to play, tag us on any photos you upload or let us know in the comments below. Lastly, if you want to be the first to find out about our new uploads, subscribe to the channel and click that bell. Games on board. We do the reading, you do the playing.